This happened back in the early days of my childhood. I was maybe 12 years old at the time, living just outside of a major city in Australia. It was Christmas Eve, and unlike other countries who have their white Christmas, Australia's Christmas is smack bang in the middle of summer, so the last place you want to be is indoors, unless for some reason your house has an air conditioner, which 90% of the households do not. Since it was Christmas time, school kids were on school holidays, so I invited a friend over and convinced my dad to drive us to a swimming pool complex. It's a pretty large place, with cheapish food and a huge water slide, so naturally, we were pretty content staying the entire day there, spending our parents' money and enjoying the cool water. It started getting later in the day, and we were told we had to go soon. We begged and pleaded to stay a little while longer, which led to a compromise that we would have to walk home if we didn't want to leave now, which we'd actually done a couple of times since the pool complex wasn't too far from my house. We agreed and said we would be home soon. It actually didn't take us too long before we wanted to leave, since the sun was setting and the pool was getting a bit too cold for comfort. We placed towels around our dripping bodies, waved goodbye to the staff at the entrance to the pool, and began to trek home. It usually didn't take us all that long to get home, but today my friend had the brilliant idea to take a shortcut, which in turn actually ended up taking us twice the amount of time to get anywhere near my house. He then joked, saying, "At least we know for next time." I called him an idiot and said we better get home by dark. So we were now really getting close to my house, and in fact it was dark by this time. My phone was flat, so I was trying to speed walk as fast as I could, as I knew my parents would be wondering where we were and asked us if we'd been good this year. He then reached into the back of his van and pulled out a red box that had been wrapped like a Christmas present. He then gestured for us to come closer. We said we really needed to get going, as our parents would be wondering where we were. He then pulled the greasiest smile I'd ever seen and offered to give us a lift to our house, and not to his torture chamber. This guy must have been pretty intoxicated to think that we were going to actually do this and it would work. We said no thank you, as our house was just a few blocks over, and sped up our pace. We thought that this would make the guy go away, but he slowly cruised on the right side of us, trying to persuade us to get into his van, saying he had loads of presents in the back that he doesn't know what to do with. My friend started getting a little impatient and told the guy that we didn't want his greasy presents. This seemed to piss him off, and he told us we'd be on Santa's naughty list. He then drove 10 meters in front of us, swung his passenger door open, and said, "Look, the present is on the seat. If you take it, you can take it. I don't mind." We were now staying as far away from this guy's van as possible, staying off the path and into people's lawns as we were walking. When we reached the point where we'd be walking past the van, I shit you not, we heard someone sneeze from the back of the van. My eyes locked onto his, and I pulled out my phone, my flat phone, and said I was calling the police. He spat on the ground in front of us and sped off down the road. We then bolted down a side route I knew took me directly to my house. Our adrenaline kept us fueled enough to run all the way home. When we got to my driveway, we agreed not to tell my parents, as they wouldn't let us go out at night again if they knew this had happened. I kind of wanted to tell them, but my friend insisted that we should keep it quiet and never take that shortcut again. We never did see that man again, and I hope no one fell for those presents he was offering. So, greasy Santa guy, let's not meet. My father moved to Manhattan from Peru in 1970. One night during this time period, he was out at a bar with his friend Carlos, also from Peru. Sometime during the night, they were approached by a well-spoken, friendly, nicely dressed American man. He offered to buy them a few rounds, and they spent a few hours drinking and talking. After a while, the man invited them back to his apartment, somewhere on the Upper East Side, to keep drinking and hanging out. My father instantly and instinctively was not into this idea, but Carlos, drunk and chasing more free drinks, stupidly insisted that they take him up on it. They arrived at the apartment, and after an hour or so, Carlos was passed out, sitting up in the man's reclining chair. Everything had been fine, but my dad was never comfortable with the idea, and now he knew it'd be even more complicated with Carlos passing out. He decided he wanted to go to the bathroom for a minute to splash some water on his face and sober himself up. When he stepped inside, he immediately noticed a large pair of scissors sitting on the sink. They were way larger than any normal household pair, and he compared them to something you'd see in a hospital. He told me that at this moment his entire body was overtaken with instinct, and something inside him made him pick up them scissors and put them in the waistband of his pants behind his back. When he walked back out into the living room, he found the man with his hand on Carlos's leg. He asked him what he thought he was doing and said that they were leaving right now. The man just told him to relax and keep drinking, but enough was enough, and my father was insistent. At this point, he said that the man's face dropped, his voice lowered, and his whole demeanour changed. "You're not going anywhere," was the reply from the man as he produced a large knife from a pocket of his own. Upon this, my father pulled out the scissors from behind his back and locked eyes with the man. They stood tensely for a moment as my father explained in words or less, "I've got scissors and you've got a knife. If you come for me, I'm getting you too." The man, realising the stalemate, put the knife down and said, "Get the hell out." My dad shook Carlos awake, practically carrying him to his feet, and pushed him out the door, never taking his eyes off the man or his hands off the scissors. He said the man stood in the doorway and glared at them as they backed down the hallway to the elevator. So, possible murderer, and God knows what else, in 1970s Manhattan? Let's not meet. I worked at a beauty store, and today an older man with a white beard came in. I greeted him and asked if there was anything I could do to help him. He stuck his hand out and said, "Hey, I'm Santa Claus." I go to shake his hand as I laugh uncomfortably. As I try to pull my hand away, he stops shaking my hand and just holds it, and then proceeds to tell me about how he's popular in the next town over as Santa Claus and how their local beauty store knows him very well. He held my hand for a solid 2 minutes as he told me about his stories of being Saint Nick. He finally let me go after I tried pulling away several times, and then finally asked me where the coloured hairspray was so he could make his beard appear whiter. After helping him, I took him to the register to ring him up, and as I tell him his total, he hands me a card with a picture of Santa Claus on it that said, "Happy Holidays." I take it and say thank you, and then he pulls out another card, but keeps it face down. He then says, "Now this one is my pride and joy. When I give this to you, I want you to keep it for yourself and not show anyone. Not your husband or your boyfriend, nobody." I was so uncomfortable that all I wanted was for this man to leave the store. He made me promise I wouldn't show another soul, which made me even more uncomfortable. I nervously take the card in hopes that he would leave sooner. I quickly turn the card over and glance at it. Thankful it was just a picture of a wax bottle that said Pride, and a dish cleaning bottle that said Joy. The jokes seemed like innocent dad jokes until what he said next. He then proceeded to ask me how long I've been working there and what days I work, and then what hours I had. I just answered by saying I'm not sure, over and over again, since I find those things to be personal information. He then asks me how many other girls work at the store. I told him I didn't know, as I told him his total for the third time. He finally hands me One of my childhood homes had a balcony that was attached to both my mother's bedroom and mine via big glass doors in each of our rooms. Next to the balcony are 2 trees, one of which I used to climb up and down from the balcony. One night when my brother and mother weren't home, I was about 13 and I was reading in bed with a very dim reading light. I heard what sounded like something moving in one of the trees outside. But this didn't worry me as possums and bats are very common in our area. Now, I had thin curtains on the glass doors that separated my room and the balcony. The doors faced out towards the street where street lamp light was always visible through my curtains. Shortly after hearing the tree rustling noises, I see a shadow slowly move past the doors, at which point I immediately turn off my reading light and freeze like a deer in the headlights. The shadow is tall, so it isn't a neighbour kid, and it wasn't all of my 5-foot mother. The person moved slowly, creeping as though they were trying not to be noticed. They wouldn't likely be able to see into my room, but I could see them thanks to the streetlights behind them. They moved past my doors and out of sight. I sat there unable to move or even think about what to do, than be absolutely still. That is, until I heard another sound. The sound of someone trying to open a glass door, my mum's door, to the balcony. I didn't know if she had locked them or not, but I wasn't taking any chances. I moved as quickly and as silently as I could to my bedroom door and locked it. I listened for what the person was doing now. They were still jiggling the glass door handle, but it sounded like the doors weren't opening. I felt relief. This person surely couldn't get in, and all I had to do was wait for them to realise that, and then they would leave, right? Well, I heard light footsteps move back along the balcony to my set of glass doors until I saw his shadow stop directly in front of them. Again, I froze. He couldn't see me. He couldn't know I could see him. I saw a shadow of a hand reach up to my door's handle and my heart stopped. Had I actually locked those doors myself today? I was out there earlier. What if I forgot? The seconds leading up to him grabbing the handle felt like an eternity. But thankfully, when this person tried to open the door, it did not open. It was locked. I sighed such a sigh of relief, I was worried he had heard it. After this, he began pacing the length of the balcony. I didn't have a mobile, and the landline was at the other end of the house, but I was scared to take my eyes off him. I was silently crying and praying that they would just leave. Then I heard him stop moving. He then said, "I could just break the glass, you know." Before I could even process this, I saw car headlights turn around the corner of my street and then stop at the property. My mum was home. The person on the balcony moved out of sight, and then I heard a loud thump as they jumped off of it. When my mum came inside, I was hysterical and was barely coherent enough to tell her what had happened. Eventually I got the message across and she called the police. They never found or caught anyone, but a neighbour reported a truck in the street that matched the description of a truck that had been reported recently for attempted child abductions near my school, just 1 block away. Last night I was lying in bed watching YouTube videos on my phone and falling asleep when I hear someone struggling with their lock next door, then silence, and then a different adjacent condo sounds like they're having trouble. This didn't sound right. I silently got out of bed and grabbed my MP9. Side note, my condo has an extremely open floor plan, all rooms open into the main room. Then my door, fidgeting, and then nothing. Then I see the outline of a man in the twilight at my cracked open window. I can see his silhouette through the blinds. I chamber around. He punched my screen out and tried to climb in. Had his head, one arm and one leg through. I still didn't fire. I dialed 911. Took almost 30 seconds to get someone with all these auto-attendant menus asking if I speak Spanish. All the while, I'm screaming, "Get the F out of my house." Someone call 911. Dispatch finally answers. I start shouting my address. Shouting, "Get the F out of my house. Home invasion in progress. I can't get out, and I will defend myself. Note, I live in Portland, Oregon. No duty to retreat." Here's where I screw up. I set the pistols down and grabbed my Mossberg 500 12 gauge, loaded with 00 buck. I racked the slide. In the moment I had hoped that the distinctive sound would show that I'm not messing around. He says, "I don't give a fuck." Well, I switch back to the MP, and I practice with it more, and I am more confident with it. Plus 17 shots versus 5. But stupidly switching weapons, I took my eyes off the target, left myself vulnerable. Big screw up. Could have had a really bad outcome. But he just stared at me, then left, and that was it. About a minute later, 3 cruisers roll up. Total time of incident from initially picking up my pistol to cops showing up was under 4 minutes. When seconds count, police are minutes away, even with a pretty fast response time like that. I will also say that Portland PD have always been very professional when I've dealt with them. No complaints. Once statements were done and they left to canvass the area, I grabbed my Shield 9 and drove to my girlfriend's house for the night. The first home invasion happened in 1994. I was about 5 years old and we lived in a rough area. Housing commission. I was in the lounge room with my new baby sister when a brick came smashing through the window next to us. The brick landed inside my sister's bassinet, but luckily she was unharmed. The next thing I remember is my parents hurrying myself and my two brothers upstairs, and then they told us to hide under our beds. I watched my dad get a knife and tape it to the end of a broom. They tried kicking our front door in, but they didn't succeed, and the police arrived and scared them off. Needless to say, we all slept in the same room that night. The second home invasion happened when I was 10 years old. I came home to my family going about their normal behaviour. My dad had had some friends over, and they were all at the kitchen table laughing and talking. It was about 7 p.m. For those in Australia, we were watching Home and Away. We used to watch that in the UK as well. Side note, anyway. My dad and his friends went into my parents' room while my mother, sister and older brother and one of my dad's friends stayed in the lounge room. After a few minutes we heard the sound of things falling over and bangs up against the wall. So we all looked up the hallway, and out came my dad's friend holding a knife to his throat and demanding money. They cut our phone line and forced us into the same lounge, but keeping my dad in the same position. Terrified, my sister and I started crying uncontrollably. We were told to shut up or they would hurt us. We couldn't stop, and I was stabbed in the top of my thigh. The scar today still looks like an indent. My dad convinced them all to go downstairs. All we heard was fighting, and the front door slammed. My dad came back upstairs with a big cut across the top of his arm, saying they were gone. We all ran next door and called the police. My other brother stayed in his room the entire time and didn't even know it had happened because he had earphones in. I was working from home today, and my husband had to leave for the dentist right as the plumber arrived to work on the bathtub. No problem. The plumber has been here before, he's legit. I'm on a conference call with the customer. Plumber has to leave to get a part, comes back, fixes the tub, yay, then leaves. I'm still on the conference call on mute. Give the faucet a thorough check to make sure it certainly feels right. Sit down in front of the computer and the doorbell rings. I bet the plumber forgot something, like a tool. So I run to the door and I open it, and there is stood a strange person, with a strange smile on his face. I'm shorter than 5'1", and this person was close to 6 foot tall. Hello? Hello? Can I help you? Hello? He looks over my shoulder at the room behind me, and he starts trying to walk in. My door isn't fully opened. I'm blocking the entrance with my body, and he starts to walk into me like I'm not even there. I weigh about 120 pounds, and this person was well over 200. I threw my shoulder into his rather large belly and pushed back. You are not allowed in my house. He stepped back, and I slammed the door. Then I realised the client had gone off mute. Hope they didn't hear that. I stayed on the call, very professional, answered all my client's questions. When the call ended, I called the cops. Now I'm scared. Was that a potential home invasion? The guy was huge. I have no idea who he was, and he certainly was not with the plumber, or the plumber. So the more I think about it, the more terrified I get, and the bigger he gets in my mind. I held it together through the call, but now I'm shaking. Am I overreacting to a stranger walking into my house? He wasn't even a Jehovah's Witness. He didn't even tell me anything other than hello, and tried to walk into my house, expecting me to move out of the way. How bizarre. I have a pretty big house. My room has a huge window where my bed is right next to it, so at night I usually stay up on my iPod on my bed with the window open. On the outside of my window there's the driveway where my dad's cars are parked. The window was closed that day and all the lights were off except for the red glow of my alarm clock. At around 3 a.m, I, for some reason, look out my bedroom window, and there's this guy about 5'8" in a big black sweater staring directly into my window. He's about 10 feet away from me, and I'm staring right at his face. I thought he was going to run away, but I realised he can't see me. While all of this is happening, he's walking very slowly sideways, still looking right at my window. I run to my dad's room, wake him the F up, get a bat I had lying around, and run to the front door, which leads right out to the driveway. I unlock the door, turn the doorknob, and kick the shit out of the door, so he can clearly hear it. I walk outside to give him the time to run. I looked around and see my dad's car door was wide open. Also, the backyard motion-sensitive lights were on, which meant he ran around my house out the right side. No cops necessary, like a boss.